Greetings, AP Euro scholars, for our review on Unit 12 on World War II. Starting from top to bottom on the review sheet here, Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf is his blueprint for his political beliefs and his plans for the future of Germany. This includes this idea of Lebensraum, which is the notion that Germany must colonize the land between Germany and the Black Sea, which namely means the areas approximately of Poland, Ukraine, Russia, and the people who are there, the Slavs, need to be subjugated or they need to be removed. Military limits put on Germany by Versailles included a limited army, limited armaments, a limited navy, essentially no air force, no planes that are armed, and this is one of the things that Hitler will renounce once he comes into power. 1938, you have the Anschluss. This is the forced merger with neighboring Austria. In 1938, you have the Sudetenland is demanded by Germany to be returned. This was taken off of Germany was when they made a brand new country, the Czechoslovakia. And this is an area that has approximately 3 million Germans in it. And the attendees at the Munich conference who are dealing with this crisis where Hitler's threatening to invade Czechoslovakia over the Sudetenland is attended by the British, French, Italians, and the Germans. The Czechs are not invited. The Czechs are sold out. And this is considered an example of appeasement. This is giving in to a bully to avoid conflict. And the man who comes off the plane from Munich waving a piece of paper saying Hitler has assured him of peace and that we have achieved peace in our time is Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Why no resistance to Hitler's occupation of Austria and Czechoslovakia? Well, first of all, there is no desire to go to war. World War I is still in people's memories. This horrible bloodbath must not happen again is in most people's minds. Secondly, there's a depression. There's economic unemployment and very slow recovery. And there is, I think, for some people, it's not entirely unreasonable for Hitler to want to repatriate Germans who've fallen outside of Germany's borders. Remember, about 10% of Germany's German population is in either Czechoslovakia or in Poland. September 1, 1939, invasion of Poland. This officially sparks World War II in Europe. But keep in mind, at the same time, the USSR is invading from the east. The USSR invades eastern Poland. The USSR takes over the 3 Baltic states, the Baltic republics. This would be Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. The USSR invades Finland and slices off a piece of Romania called Bessarabia. So there is a double invasion going on here. And you should take note of this. It's not just Hitler. He's not the only bad guy in the picture here. The Sitzkrieg is the nickname for the period between when Hitler invades Poland and the time he continues his invasion of the Low Countries in May of 1940. So the invasion of Poland is September 1st, 1939, and you have a good, how many months would this be? September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. You've got 8 months there. 8 months where people are sitting around, thus the term Sitzkrieg. And after this, Hitler in the spring will invade Norway, Belgium, Luxembourg, Denmark, the Netherlands, and the coup de grace here will be a 4-week invasion of France before the French cave in. The Western response to the invasion of Poland is France and Britain declare war, but France isn't in the picture very long. They capitulate after a mere month of fighting. Other nations invaded by Germany, I just gave you the list there: Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France here in 1940. Vichy is the name of the unoccupied southern part of France under a collaborationist regime led by General Pétain, hero of World War I. This is a pro-fascist and anti-Semitic, very sympathetic to the Nazi state here. They are going to round up Jews. They are going to send young men to work in German factories, not entirely voluntarily, of course, but this is going to be a state which is going to see French industry churning out German war material. for the duration of the war. The Blitzkrieg, this is the name of this idea of lightning war, this very kinetic, fast-moving attack where planes go behind enemy lines and blow up bridges and things like that. Tanks roll across the border, followed by infantry. Very different means of fighting compared to World War I, which was largely static and trench warfare. The effect of Italian setbacks in their invasion of Greece and North Africa, well, this brings into the Germans to the rescue. The Germans get tied down in the Balkans and North Africa where they had not originally intended to be tied down, and you have hundreds of thousands of German soldiers which have to guard the back of Mussolini, who's botching these invasions here. Battle of Britain, 1940. This is from July to October 1940, where the Germans are massively bombing British cities, notably London. Approximately 60,000 civilians will be killed here. Battle of Britain is won by the scrappy RAF, the Royal Air Force, against the German Luftwaffe, and partly because of the Brits invent this nifty little device called radar, so they can see the Luftwaffe coming. But the big thing here that stops this is Hitler, he's going to be turning his attention very shortly to the Soviet Union. 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact. This is the cynical deal between Hitler and Stalin for a peace agreement between them. They will not invade each other. And you guys know that from class, in the summer of 41, the Germans with 3.2 million soldiers will roll into the USSR. And I'll just say right now, if for the rest of the review here, I might go back and forth calling the USSR the Russians. They're virtually synonymous, but the USSR, of course, is composed of 14 other Soviet socialist republics, such as Ukraine and the Baltic states and so forth. But for our purposes here, the Russians and the Soviets are really the same people. Operation Barbarossa is this invasion of the Soviet Union in the summer of 41. Nazi conduct of the war in the USSR is basically a war of, near religious fanatic, and I'm using religious in a metaphorical sense, not that the Nazis are religious, but a war of extermination. This is a crusade to rid the world of Slavic, Slavic contamination here. The Germans, when they go into the USSR, before they're pushed out, kill 20 million. This includes civilians and soldiers. The Soviet claim is much higher than this, closer to 26 million. You have 20 million homeless. You have tens of thousands of towns and cities utterly destroyed. Destruction of about 40,000 miles of railway track, about 2/3 of Soviet industry. I mean, this is an absolute, it's a bloodbath and a war of just unmatched destruction, kind of unfathomable here. The goal here for invading the Soviet Union is in part to get this Lebensraum, this land, to colonize Germans on. It's partly hatred of communism, hatred of Stalin, hatred of Slavic people. More practically, in the southern part of the USSR, the aim here is to get oil. Germany doesn't have oil, and the Soviets do. The big Soviet advantage here is strategic depth. They can keep backing up, keep backing up, and keep backing up. And the Germans are drawn in, and they think the war is going to be quick. And pretty much every historian will say this is the disastrous decision of the war that Hitler makes. His soldiers are stranded deep in Russia with overextended supply lines, and General Mudd and General Winter are going to freeze his troops as the Soviets launch ultimately an effective counterattack. The final solution, or the Holocaust, is this killing of the Jews. And out of the 12 million who die in the death camps, about 6 million are Jews. Now keep in mind, most of these are not German Jews. Only a couple % of Germany's population is Jewish. Most of these are Slavic. Most of these are Polish and Ukrainian, Russian Jews. The final solution is the official German name for this, and this really comes into these concentration camps are not really until about 1942. This evolves. Before this, Jews are being discriminated against, and citizenship is taken away from them during the Nuremberg laws, and Jews are being encouraged to emigrate, to leave the country. And this there's killing going on with the invasions of Eastern Europe, but this very orderly industrial scale killing is in the very last years of the war, from 42 to 45. Holocaust is a Jewish term. It means burnt offering. This is a term that Jews use to describe what what has happened here. American neutrality and its evolution towards involvement in Europe's war. If you guys have had APUSH or U.S. history, remember there are these neutrality acts of the 1930s, which originally are meant to underpin American isolationism. There's this cynicism, there's this pessimism that Americans feel that they got suckered into a useless war. The Europeans haven't paid them back. The war doesn't seem to have been for any good reason. And in the early 30s, you have these neutrality acts which ban selling weapons to belligerents who are at war, banning loans to belligerents at war, banning Americans traveling on ships of belligerents who are at war, and sort of think a nod here to the Lusitania. And the dial, or the needle, is going to move more towards interventionism once we see German power increasing. There's going to be cash and carry as a revision of the Neutrality Acts, and this allows foreign ships to come over if they take the war goods, namely the Brits, put it on their ships, risk their ships, and pay us cash. And then when the Brits run out of money, when they're broke, there will be lend-lease, and that's where there's sort of this fiction that we're loaning them war material and we'll get it back later. But we move from very strict neutrality to relatively active intervention under lend-lease. And there's other things that are happening here, such as the destroyer for bases swap and helping the Brits hunt down submarines with, our boats are looking for subs, and we're giving the information to the Brits so they can drop depth charges. So it's called, it's the War of the Atlantic. The Americans will occupy Greenland and Iceland. This is long before we're in the war, so that the Nazis will not occupy them. We do this with Danish permission, of course. The Atlantic Charter, 1941, also before we're in the war officially. This is a statement of war aims between Churchill and FDR, and this is done on the deck of a British ship off of Newfoundland. And what are we doing, making war aims here when we're not in the war? Well, this is an agreement that this war, which we're at this point helping to back the Allies, that would be essentially the Brits, and to a lesser extent the Soviets, we're doing a run around Norway to drop goods off from Murmansk. Point being here, the Atlantic Charter is a statement of war aims for self-determination, for democracy. The Axis Tripartite Pact, this is the nickname, or the Axis is the nickname for this alliance between Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo, between Germany, Italy, and Japan. Women's contribution to the war effort, just heads up, the AP really loves women, loves feminist history, very politically correct here, and you need to be able to talk about women. So as we're going through the course here, just be, putting these women and what women are doing in your mental files here. Women are working in factories. They're working in factories on both the Axis and the Allied side by the millions. They're becoming military nurses. About 1 million women are in the Soviet military, and some of them are fighting, some of them are flying combat missions, some of them are snipers and guerrillas and doing more active military things. But basically, in Great Britain, like in the U.S., women are freeing up men to fight. They're doing clerical roles, they're telephone operators, and they are nurses. Which nations ultimately defeated the Nazis and the Italians? Well, the nations are basically three. It's the Soviets, the Americans, and the Brits. Remember, the French are knocked out of the war after just sort of a mere 4 weeks. And you should know that the brunt of the war is really borne by the Soviets. For every American soldier who's killed in this war, you have 80 Soviets who die. I mean, these are just staggering numbers. You can look this up. It's kind of it's like, is this really right? There's 80 Soviet soldiers killed for every American, and you have about 95% of the Allied deaths are Soviets, not Americans or Brits. It's it's the back of the Wehrmacht, of the German army, is broken on sort of the anvil of Stalingrad, which is the turning point in the war. Again, the Soviets lose more soldiers in Stalingrad than the Americans lose in all of the war, in all of the theaters combined. So the D-Day invasion, this is June 6, 1944. It's on the northern beaches of France in the area of Normandy. It's also called Operation Overlord, Operation Normandy. And this begins the second front that Stalin had been asking for from way, way longer before. And Stalin was very resentful, was very angry that we delayed this, he wants a distraction. He wants the Germans to be pulled off the Eastern Front where they're hammering and killing and just doing all these atrocities in the Soviet Union. Finally, this second front is opened up in June 6, 1944. There is an invasion of North Africa in 1942, Operation Torch. There's this invasion of Italy, but from Stalin's playbook, this is sort of small change that we're messing around the Italian peninsula and then the Saharan desert before that. But the D-Day invasion is in 1944. Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe after Hitler's defeat. The Red Army does not allow democratic governments to emerge when the war is over. The Red Army imposes communism in the Russian zone of Germany, in Poland, in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Hungary, and the Soviets take over the 3 Baltic states, which were given independence after World War I, and those would be Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And these countries are under the Soviet boot, under communism, there's no democracy, no parliamentary debate, there's no civil liberties, there's no freedom of travel. These countries are held hostage really until the fall of communism between 1989 and 91. The effect of the air war over Germany. There are approximately 350,000 Germans are killed in the bombing of German cities. And about 20 million Germans are made homeless. About 90% of German railways are made non-operational, and dozens of cities are basically just pulverized into the ground because of carpet bombing. There was a question once on the AP exam, reasons for Germany's defeat. This is really the only time I can remember in the last, this is sort of by my reckoning in the last 20 years, that there's a military history question, which all the review books say there isn't going to be. And the question was, why did Germany lose? Why was Germany defeated between, I think the question was between 39 and 45. And he asked for economic, diplomatic, and military reasons. Some economic reasons that come to mind here. The Germans can't outproduce the Americans, let alone the Americans and the Brits combined. There's a lot of waste of resources in the war on the whole Holocaust operation. Supplies that really could go better to German troops are going to kill Jews, although that's not the reason why the Germans lose the war. And lack of oil. The Germans, part of this attack on Russia is driven by the need for energy, for fuel. Diplomatic reasons, Hitler is bogged down, bailing out Mussolini, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of German soldiers, which could be better positioned elsewhere, or in North Africa, getting defeated by Montgomery and Patton. You have this disastrous decision to honor the alliance with the Japanese, and after Pearl Harbor, the Germans declaring war on the United States. Now, we're aiding the Allies, but at this point, we're pretty hot. We were going to go after Japan, but once Germany declares war on us, there's this agreement that we will, between at least Churchill and FDR, that we will aim at the Germans first, because if the Germans knock the Soviets and the Brits out, we're going to be all alone here. So declaring war on the U.S., in my book, would be diplomatic blunder. Some military reasons for defeat. One is this military overstretch, the invasion of the USSR, and taking on the U.S., Britain, and the USSR all at the same time. Of course, there's some overlap here between military and economic resources. So some thoughts here on World War II. And those of you who are in my class here, there's a lot of overlap here between the 1920s and 30s and 40s here with the rise of Mussolini and Hitler, and their agendas are sort of borne out here with Mussolini in the 30s and then Hitler in the 40s as he starts this war September 1, 1939 in Poland, and the war ends in 1945. So study well, study smart, study often, study early, and we'll see you there real soon at the test. Good luck.